Our scripture this morning, take a look at it. It's in Luke 12, 13 through 21. And it's printed in the back section of your trifold bulletin. Beverly will read that to us in a moment. But I want to give you a little background on it so you can understand where I am coming from and where the text might lead us. Those that may be visitors or not familiar with how I prefer to lead worship, especially scripture and sermons, is to give you the same background that I have or have worked through to arrive at the message that I share. You know, it's one of the things that may separate our education and our training as clergy from other churches or denominations is, you know, there's that firm belief that before we can apply Scripture for today and try to do it faithfully, we have to understand what it meant to the people then. Otherwise, we make a lot of assumptions that we have gained over 2,000 years of history, living, and advancement, and that would not be fair to the text because those people did not think the way we do. Their world was different. And that's very applicable today. This scripture is called the story of the greedy farmer. And if you go back and you read Jewish law, and you have to go back to the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, and you look at the books of law, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, you will find that there are very, very specific rules that people are supposed to follow in regards to crops, farming, and general society. And so when Jesus shares this story, the people out there know more than we do. They know what should be done. And in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, these are very short and specific, but later on, as Judaism progressed and you had other famous rabbis, and they got the Midrash and the Mishnah and these other interpretations, it only got more complicated. I will not bore you with all that. You could write a thesis on it, but I want to share a few things. And first of all, I want to read from Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And those of you who take notes, if you're interested, it's Leviticus 19, verse 9, and Deuteronomy 24, verses 19 through 20. Okay? Leviticus says, "Now when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest." It's expanded a bit in Deuteronomy, where the author says, "When you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, for the widow, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the works of your hands. When you beat your olive tree, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the alien, the orphan, and the widow." And of course, alien is a foreigner in your land, and God is always reminding the Jewish people to treat foreigners well, because, and he says, remember, at one time you were a foreigner in this land too. Repeatedly, God says that. First of all, they did not believe that the land belonged to them. Okay? Property ownership is a relatively new thing in human history. And it began primarily in the United States over our lifetime. Prior to that, people didn't own their land. They didn't own their land. Nobles owned the land. The kings owned the land. Those who were born, according to their thinking, in strata above them. Remember, a king represented God on earth. So it was all the kings, and these people worked for the king. And in Jesus' day, of course, foreign governments, the Romans and others, would take advantage of it, but the Jewish people did not believe that the land was theirs in terms of property ownership. Okay? The creation was God's, and all that's in it. All belonged to God. And we are but stewards and caregivers. We are temporary residents, is basically how it says. God has given you this earth to enjoy and to share, but it belongs to me, to God. And so they had rules to take care of everyone, because it belonged to everyone. And the first rules were that if you were gleaning the harvest, like the wheat, and at first you picked it by hand, but let's say I'm picking it by hand and I hit a weed and a thorn, I go, ouch, and I drop the sheaves that are in my hand. I don't pick them up. I don't pick them up. Those are to be left there for the widow, the orphan, and the immigrant, legal or not. It just says alien, the foreigner on your land. You leave those there. Similarly, if I'm picking an olive tree or picking grapes off the vine and I miss some, or some ripen before I get there and fall to the ground, I don't touch them and I don't go back and pick what I missed. You leave it there. And it got even more so as technology took over, and they figured these square boards and they cut holes on the bottom of them with an apparatus that would cut down the wheat for them rather than having to pick it by hand, but it left debris. You left it. Okay? And in some cases, the poor, the widow, those folks would literally follow the workers of the land to pick up what was left behind. And if you've been out west, you know that many farmers today farm in circles with those big circular sprinklers. Well, the scripture says you don't plant the corners for yourself. You leave those. Those two are left. So there's an understanding of society. Number one, it's all God's, and we're dependent upon God. And to claim it as yours is not right. It's not right. And you are to use it to take care of society. That it's about justice and fairness for all people, not just property owners. Now that runs very foreign to our thinking today, and things have changed a lot in that regard. It got so specific, or interpretation, that if you look or listen again to this text I read from Leviticus, now when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap the very corners of your land, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. The first you, now when you reap the harvest, you in Hebrew in that case is plural. Okay, in Hebrew you can use the same word and it means singular or plural. So it's talking to all the people, it's a general law, but the second time it comes up, now when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the corners, it's singular. So there it is talking about the individual harvesting, or the farmer. Now it got so specific that, and I know I've shared with you, that in the ancient world they not only had letters, but corresponding letters, numerology, they would write with numbers as well as words, that in Hebrew, between Pahar and Kotsar, there was a difference of 2 letters, and they added them together, and it came up to 16. So the law then became, before you take your harvest and offer a portion to God, or you think you're going to keep it, you have to give to the poor, the widow, the foreigner 1/16. So they even translated it that way. And the law said it wasn't yours until you gave that portion away. It didn't belong to you, it was God's until you gave that portion away. So a whole interesting concept. compared to the way we think of property and land and so forth. Having served churches in farm communities, I can appreciate this. I also, there's inflation out there, so I want to help you. The first church I worked at, they grew popcorn. And I want you to know that I would go down to the popcorn factory at times and watch the trucks pull in and the trucks pull out. And except for generic popcorn, it's all the same. So save some money. You don't need to get Orville Redenbacher, just get Red Ball. It's all the same except for the generic. It got the crud. Okay? Beverly, if you would read this scripture, and I invite you to follow along.
Luke 12:13 through 21, the story of the greedy farmer. Someone out of the crowd said, "Teacher, order my brother to give me a fair share of the family inheritance." He replied, "Mister, what makes you think it's any of my business to be a judge or mediator for you?" Speaking to the people, he went on, "Take care, protect yourself against the least bit of greed. Life is not defined by what you have, even if you have a lot." Then he told him this story. The farm of a certain rich man produced a terrific crop. He talked to himself, "What can I do? My barn isn't big enough for this harvest." Then he said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll gather all my grain and goods, and I'll say to myself, 'Self, you've done well. You've got it made. You can now retire. Take it easy and have the time of your life.' Just then God showed up and said, 'Fool, tonight you die, and your barn full of goods, who gets it?' That's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God."